Welcome to another deep dive right here on My Mind MashUps.
Great to be here.
Today we're venturing into some, well, fascinating territory. The realms of ego and pride.
Right.
Now, before you picture cartoon villains, just stick with us for a bit.
Yeah, it's not quite like that.
We're going to explore these powerful psychological forces, looking at how they can actually be helpful in some ways.
Right.
And how they can really trip us up in others.
Definitely.
We'll be drawing from sources like Breaking Free, The Power of Losing Ego and Pride, some really insightful cultural and philosophical ideas too, and, the framework we've built to understand this.
Good mix of perspectives.
Yeah. Our goal today is to get a real handle on what ego and pride are all about, how they impact our lives, sometimes in ways we might not even realize. And ultimately, I think, to uncover the transformative power that can come with a bit of letting go.
Exactly. Leading to, hopefully, a more connected, peaceful, and effective life for you listening.
That's the aim. And hey, if you're finding these deep dives valuable, we'd be thrilled if you hit the like button.
Yeah, it helps.
Maybe share this with someone who'd find it thought-provoking, and definitely subscribe or follow My Mind MashUps wherever you tune in.
We're on Amazon Music, Audible, Facebook, Pocket Casts, Spotify, YouTube.
All the places, so you won't miss any of our future explorations.
Okay, so ego and pride. It's a conversation that really touches on something deeply human, doesn't it? This interplay between our sense of self and, our achievements.
This really does.
As Breaking Free starts to explore, we often hear the warnings about ego and pride, but it's less common to really dig into why they exist and the nuances of their influence.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this a bit then. When we talk about ego and pride, what are we really talking about at their most fundamental level? It's not just about being boastful, is it?
No, not at all. Breaking Free gives us a helpful starting point, suggesting that ego and pride, well, in their origins, they're actually tied to our survival.
Survival. How so?
Well, think about Freud's concept of the ego, which the book mentions. It's that part of us constantly trying to juggle our basic desires, our internal sense of right and wrong, the conscience, and what's actually possible in the real world.
Okay.
It's what allows us to develop a consistent sense of who we are, that inner I that sort of narrates our experiences.
Like an operating system.
You could almost see it like that, yeah.
Yeah.
The core software running our personal identity.
The core software. I like that. That makes a lot of sense. So it's not something we can just uninstall then.
Not really, no. It's fundamental.
And then there's pride, which seems to have different flavors, doesn't it? It's not all the same thing.
Precisely. The research highlighted in Breaking Free makes a distinction between what they call authentic pride and hubristic pride.
Authentic versus hubristic. Okay, what's the difference?
Authentic pride is that genuine feeling of satisfaction you get when you've worked hard and achieved something meaningful to you. It feels good, it motivates.
Earned success.
Exactly. Hubristic pride, though, that's the more problematic side. The arrogance, the conceit, that sense of being superior to others, the constant need to be dominant.
Okay. So one feels good and pushes us forward. The other, well, it pushes everyone else away, probably.
That's a good way to put it. And Breaking Free uses this really vivid image I thought was helpful. The ego as a kind of armor we might have needed when we were younger.
Armor.
Yeah, like it helped us figure out our place, protected us a bit, maybe.
I can see that.
It served a purpose in our development. But, like a winter coat you've outgrown, that armor can start to restrict us. It limits our ability to move freely, to be adaptable.
Like an outgrown coat. That's a powerful metaphor.
And John Tooby's idea, also mentioned in Breaking Free, gives us another angle. He suggests that our innate pride system actually evolved to help us navigate social groups.
Wait, evolved to help us cooperate?
Yeah, to gain respect, status, and cooperate effectively within the group.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because if it was meant to help us get along, how does it so often lead to conflict and isolation? That seems like the opposite.
That's the crucial point, isn't it? When these mechanisms become too rigid, when our ego becomes overly inflated, or when our pride tips over into that hubristic kind,
Right.
they stop serving their original helpful function. Instead, they become this lens through which we see the world in a very self-centered way, often distorting our interactions and our understanding of things.
And Breaking Free really dives into what it calls the hidden costs of letting our ego and pride run wild. It's not always these dramatic blow-ups, is it? It's often much more subtle.
Exactly. These subtle ways they just chip away at the things we say we care about most.
Like relationships, for instance. Let's talk about how they affect our relationships.
Yeah, relationships are often where the negative impact is felt most acutely. The book points to research indicating that excessive pride shows up as, well, they term it persistent disagreeableness.
Persistent disagreeableness sounds unpleasant.
It is. It means a tendency to react negatively when things get stressful, and just a general lack of attentiveness to the needs of the relationship itself.
Okay, give me some practical examples. What does that look like day to day?
Think about the behaviors that erode connection, constantly needing to be right, an unwillingness to compromise or find common ground, always pointing out flaws in the other person.
Oof. Refusing to apologize.
Definitely refusing to apologize, or maybe apologizing but adding a but.
Right, the non-apology apology. That deep conviction that your way is the only right way.
Exactly. It creates this constant friction, this sense of distance, like you said. It's like a slow drip that eventually undermines the whole foundation of the relationship.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. And then there's the impact on our own personal growth. Breaking free brings in Erik Erikson's idea. Generativity versus stagnation.
Right, Erickson's stages of psychosocial development.
So how does an unchecked ego play into that? Generativity is about contributing beyond ourselves, right?
Exactly. It's about finding ways to contribute something meaningful beyond just our own immediate needs, mentoring, creating community involvement, leaving a positive mark in some way.
Okay. And stagnation is?
And stagnation, then, is when we become too inward-focused, too concerned with our own image, our own needs, which, as you said, sounds like prime ego territory.
Gotcha.
An overblown ego can really trap us in these self-focused patterns, preventing us from that broader engagement and contribution.
And the consequences aren't trivial, are they? Breaking free mentions some serious potential outcomes.
They can be quite significant, yeah. Things like a potential decline in cognitive function as we age, poor overall health, lower levels of life satisfaction, and even feelings of regret later on.
Wow. That's a hefty price to pay for holding on to an inflated sense of self.
It really is. And it connects with this other idea the book raises, this contrast between living defensively versus living with curiosity. That really struck me too.
Me too. When our ego is in the driver's seat, we're constantly braced for these perceived threats to our self-image, aren't we?
That's right. So much mental and emotional energy gets tied up in just protecting this often quite fragile sense of self.
Yeah.
But imagine if that energy could be freed up, directed towards learning new things, towards exploring different perspectives, towards really engaging with the world around us instead.
It makes you wonder what's possible.
Right. The psychologist mentioned in Breaking Free had this real breakthrough moment when they consciously shifted from that defensive posture
Okay.
to simply asking, why am I feeling this way right now?
That pause.
That moment of genuine curiosity. It opened up a whole new realm of understanding and effectiveness for them.
Just pausing and asking why. It sounds simple, but probably isn't easy in the moment.
Definitely takes practice.
Okay, so we're starting to get a clearer picture of the downsides. But there's this common idea floating around, isn't there? That having a strong ego is a sign of strength, and that humility, well, that's somehow weak.
Yes, that perception is definitely out there.
But breaking free, and a lot of the cultural wisdom we've looked at, really challenges that head on.
It does. And this is a really important shift in perspective, I think. Across many different cultures and philosophical traditions, we find a very different understanding of strength and humility.
Like in Buddhism.
Exactly. Take Buddhism, for instance. Humility isn't about putting yourself down or self-deprecation. It's seen as a sacred quality, actually, a natural outcome of moving beyond the limitations of the ego.
Moving beyond the ego.
Yeah. There's that quote we came across, when one realizes that one is nothing, one is also everything. It sounds paradoxical, but it captures this idea of transcending the small, separate self to connect with something much larger.
Nothing, but also everything. That's deep.
And they really admired figures like Sariputta for their humility. It's seen as a virtue to be actively cultivated.
And it's not just in Eastern philosophies, right? Even the Stoics, who we often associate with inner fortitude and resilience, they valued humility too.
Absolutely. For the Stoics, humility was about having an accurate assessment of yourself, recognizing your place as part of a much grander system, like Marcus Aurelius wrote about, seeing ourselves as just limbs of one body.
Okay.
It's about accepting what's within your control and what isn't, grounding yourself in reality, not in some puffed-up sense of your own importance. As one of the quotes in our references put it, Stoicism is not arrogance, it's humility.
Accurate self-assessment. That sounds like strength, not weakness.
Exactly. And then you look at Christianity with its emphasis on service and compassion.
Yeah, humility is pretty central there too.
Very much so. In Catholicism, it's considered a cardinal virtue. You see it in the examples of saints like Francis of Assisi, or how the Madonna of humility is depicted in art, showing Mary sitting on the ground, very humble.
Right.
Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas viewed it as staying within our proper limits, submitting to a higher authority. And that quote from Memar Baba, "True humility is strength, not weakness," really pulls this cross-cultural theme together.
It seems to be a universal insight almost. And Islam too, you mentioned, the concept of tawadu.
Absolutely, tawadu. The Quran itself praises those who walk upon the earth with humility. And there's that striking quote from Imam Ashafi: "The loftiest in status are those who do not know their own status."
Wow, that really flips the script on status, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests true greatness lies in not being obsessed with your own importance or rank.
So it's fascinating how this idea of humility as a genuine source of strength keeps popping up across such diverse ways of thinking. And breaking free even connects this to effective leadership, which might surprise some people.
Yeah, that's a really interesting connection. The evidence suggests that leaders who demonstrate humility often have more profound and lasting positive influence.
How so?
Well, they tend to be more likely to take responsibility when things go wrong. Rather than blaming others, they foster a sense of accountability within their teams because they model it themselves. And they tend to inspire greater resilience in the face of challenges.
Because they're not pretending to be perfect.
Exactly. It's not about projecting this flawless image. It's about being genuinely engaged, open, and supportive.
And the communication aspect must be key there, too.
Huge. Humble leaders tend to be better listeners, almost by definition. They value different perspectives, they show empathy, and that naturally builds greater trust, empowers people.
And leads to better results in the end.
That's what the research suggests, yeah. When ego isn't dominating the interactions, there's just more space for authentic connection and real collaboration.
Okay, this is all making a lot of sense conceptually and culturally. Now, breaking free also delves into the science behind all of this, which I found really compelling. Let's talk a bit about the brain, the default mode network.
Ah, yes, the DMN. Good stuff. So this is basically a network of brain regions that becomes more active when we're not focused on any specific external task.
Like when our mind wanders.
Exactly. It's what's often firing up when our minds wander frequently to thoughts about ourselves, about other people, things that happened in the past, or worrying about the future. Lots of self-related thought.
And this is what breaking free refers to as potentially the home of the ego, right? This network that's constantly running our internal narrative about ourselves.
Precisely that. It's continuously reinforcing our sense of I, me, mine. And the research mentioned in the book is quite interesting. It links heightened activity in the DMN to things like reduced cognitive performance on tasks.
Really? So daydreaming about yourself makes you worse at stuff.
Well, excessive, uncontrolled mind wandering linked to the DMN does seem to impair focus on external tasks, yeah. And there are also associations with conditions like depression, anxiety, and even addiction.
Wow.
It's almost like the brain can get stuck in this loop of self-referential, often negative thinking.
Okay, but there's a way to dial this down, isn't there? The book talks about practices like mindfulness.
Yes. This is where it gets really fascinating from a practical standpoint. Studies have shown that engaging in mindfulness meditation, and this seems to hold true across different types of practices, can lead to a measurable reduction in activity within the DMN.
So it literally calms down those brain regions that are so focused on me, myself, and I.
That seems to be the effect, yes.
Yeah.
It's like intentionally quietening that constant internal chatter about ourselves.
And it has more than just a quieting effect, doesn't it? The book mentioned it can actually change the brain over time, build certain areas.
Exactly. Regular mindfulness practice has been shown to strengthen areas of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex involved in planning and decision-making, the anterior cingulate cortex important for self-regulation, and the anterior insula, which is key for self-awareness and empathy.
Wait, so the areas needed for mindfulness are also needed for empathy?
That's the really interesting overlap. These brain regions are crucial for developing empathy. So by learning to quiet the ego's constant noise, we're actually enhancing our brain's capacity to understand and connect with others on a deeper emotional level.
That's a really powerful connection. Less self-obsession, physically paving the way for more empathy and compassion.
It makes intuitive sense, doesn't it? If you're not so caught up in your own internal world, your own narrative, You have more capacity to accurately perceive and understand the emotions of both yourself and others.
Yeah, it really does. And the research from Dr. Susan Whitfield Gabrielli that was mentioned that specifically highlights how mindfulness can modulate the DMN's activity.
Exactly. It provided a tangible scientific basis for why these ancient practices, these ways of training the mind, can be so effective in cultivating a less ego-driven and more compassionate way of being in the world.
Okay, so we've explored what ego and pride are, some of the ways they can negatively impact us, why letting go isn't weakness, and even some of the neuroscience. But let's make it concrete. What does this actually look like in our day-to-day lives? Breaking Free provides some really relatable examples.
Yeah, the practical application is where it really hits home. Take the idea of turning the other cheek in an argument.
Which sounds kind of passive, maybe.
Well, as the book clarifies, it's not about passively accepting this treatment or abuse. Not at all. It's about consciously choosing to shift your focus away from the immediate conflict, deciding not to escalate the situation by retaliating in kind.
Ah, okay, so it's about de-escalation.
Exactly. That example they give of pausing when someone criticizes you
Yeah.
and asking yourself internally, is defending my position right now worth potentially damaging this relationship? That's a powerful reframe.
It really is. And suggesting that simple phrase, you might be right, I need to think about that. Wow, that could change the whole dynamic of a conversation.
Totally. It can be incredibly disarming, but it requires a conscious effort, right? You have to override that immediate ego-driven impulse to defend, to counterattack, to prove them wrong.
Definitely takes effort. And then there's the seemingly simple act of admitting when you've made a mistake, saying, I was wrong.
Oh, that's a tough one for the ego. It feels counterintuitive because the ego often screams in protest, tells you it's a sign of weakness or failure.
Yeah, that phrase, I was wrong. It can feel like a personal defeat, but breaking free emphasizes how surprisingly liberating it can actually be once you do it.
It really can. That story about the senior executive whose leadership style dramatically improved when she started openly admitting her mistakes,
Yeah.
that's really impactful.
How did it improve things?
It fostered this atmosphere of trust and psychological safety. Her team felt more comfortable being open, admitting their own mistakes, taking calculated risks, because she modeled that vulnerability and accountability.
It made leadership feel more human, more approachable.
Exactly. And then the example of consciously letting someone else shine, that's another big one.
Right. Not needing to grab the spotlight all the time.
It's about having that inner security, that sense of self-worth that isn't dependent on external validation, that allows you to genuinely celebrate the achievements of others without feeling threatened or diminished yourself.
Yeah. That quote you mentioned earlier about unlocking a lighthouse of hope.
Yeah.
That was lovely.
It is beautiful, isn't it? By actively helping and encouraging people to shine, you might unlock a lighthouse of hope, love, and contribution that will light the way to a safe refuge for others.
It really paints a picture. And the practical suggestions are good too, like redirecting praise when it comes to you.
Yeah, saying, actually, Sarah had the key insight there. Or actively supporting and amplifying others' ideas in meetings.
Or even mentoring someone who you know might eventually surpass you in some way.
Exactly. These are all concrete ways to practice moving beyond that ego-driven need to always be the center of attention, the one with all the answers.
So if we start to incorporate these kinds of shifts, these practices, what are the real payoffs? Breaking Free talks about finding more freedom, more peace, and deeper connection. Those sound pretty good.
Yes, those are the profound benefits that tend to emerge over time with practice. That sense of internal peace, for instance, really begins to grow when we release that constant pressure. The pressure to appear perfect or to always be right or always be in control.
You save so much energy.
You really do. All that energy we were previously using just to protect and defend our self-image becomes available for more positive and fulfilling pursuits.
Like that Buddhist concept of emptiness you mentioned.
Yeah, it relates to that. Being free from a rigid, fixed idea of who you are. It's not about becoming nothing or disappearing, but about being truly free from the constraints the ego imposes.
And our relationships naturally become stronger and more authentic then, too, presumably.
They really do. When ego isn't the dominant force driving our interactions, genuine connection becomes possible. Riekert even backs this up. Studies show humility is a key ingredient in building trust and credibility in relationships.
Makes sense.
And the way we communicate just transforms. It's no longer about trying to prove ourselves or win every argument.
Which is exhausting.
Totally exhausting.
Mm.
Instead, it becomes more about truly listening to others, responding thoughtfully, collaborating more effectively. Even conflicts can shift from being battles the ego needs to win to opportunities for deeper understanding and connection.
And then there's the aspect of mental clarity. We touched on this with the DMN stuff. If excessive ego-driven thought can hinder our cognitive abilities.
Then learning to quiet the ego should lead to a clearer, more flexible mind.
Exactly.
So better decisions, more creativity.
Potentially, yes. Improve decision-making because you're less biased by your own needs. Enhance creativity because you're more open. The ability to see complex situations more effectively without that constant filter of, how does this affect me?
Okay, so the benefits are pretty compelling. But how do we actively cultivate this? It's clearly not like flipping a switch. Breaking Free offers some really actionable tools for this ongoing journey, right?
It does. And it emphasizes that it is a journey, a practice, a continuous process of building self-awareness and making intentional effort. Mindfulness and self-awareness are really foundational.
Like we talked about with the DMN.
Exactly. As we discussed, even brief daily mindfulness exercises, just sitting and paying attention to your breath, can start to create that crucial space between our thoughts and our automatic, often ego-driven reactions. That simple suggestion of taking in just 5 minutes each day. Focus on your breath. Notice those self-referential thoughts. I need to. She shouldn't have. As they arise, without judgment.
Crucially, without judgment.
And then gently redirecting your attention back to your breath. It sounds so straightforward, but potentially so powerful over time.
It really can be. And then there's this idea of shifting your mindset from always needing to win interactions to focusing on growing through them.
I like that reframe, win versus grow.
It's about learning to see challenges, disagreements, criticisms, not primarily as threats to our ego, but as opportunities for learning and development.
How do you do that in the moment?
A simple question to ask yourself, as the book suggests, is, what could I learn in this situation if I temporarily let go of my need to be right? Just asking the question can shift your perspective.
Suspend the need to be right. That's a good one. And the practice of daily reflection.
Yeah, taking just a few moments at the end of each day. Maybe ask yourself, where did I let my pride or my ego dictate my actions or words today?
Ooh, that requires some honesty.
It does. But the key is, it's not about beating yourself up or self-criticism. It's purely about building that awareness, noticing the patterns, so you can start to recognize those ego-driven reactions earlier next time. Maybe even catch them before they take over.
Awareness first. And I also appreciate the mention of Dr. Nadine Levy's concept of radical acceptance. How does that fit in?
Radical acceptance is about learning to embrace life's experiences, the good and the bad, the pleasant and the unpleasant, without judgment or resistance. By accepting reality as it is, rather than how our ego wishes it were, we lessen the ego's grip, its constant need to control and fix and complain.
Accepting what is. Another simple but profound idea.
Absolutely. It's all part of diminishing the ego's power over our state of being.
Okay. So as we bring this deep dive to a close, it really feels like it boils down to this. Loosening the grip of ego and pride isn't about becoming less of yourself.
No, quite the opposite.
It's about gaining so much more. Greater freedom, deeper inner peace, more meaningful connections, and ultimately becoming a more authentic and maybe even more capable version of yourself.
Well said. And breaking free encourages you listening to try just one small act of ego release today. Something tangible.
Yeah, what were some examples?
Maybe admitting when you're uncertain about something instead of bluffing, reaching out to ask for help when you need it, offering genuine, specific appreciation to someone without expecting anything back, or giving a sincere apology without any buts or qualifications.
Just one small thing.
Exactly. These small actions, as the book suggests, can be like opening doorways to a more authentic, less burdened, and ultimately more fulfilling way of living.
It really is about moving towards becoming more capable and expansive, isn't it? More than the self that's been limited by pride and fear.
That's the potential, yes.
So our question for you today listening in is, what small step will you choose to take today on that path towards greater freedom?
It's a journey well worth undertaking, even one small step at a time.
It truly is. And if you found this deep dive valuable, please do give it a like, share it with anyone who might benefit.
And definitely subscribe or follow My Mind MashUps.
Yeah, so you don't miss out on our future explorations into topics like this. You can find us on all your favorite platforms: Amazon Music, Audible, Facebook, Pocket Casts, Spotify, and YouTube.
We really appreciate you spending this time with us and diving deep into this.
This has been a deep dive with My Mind MashUps.